As Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately. "Tell us," they said, "when will this happen? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" Jesus answered, "Watch out that no one deceives you. For many will come in my name, claiming, 'I am the Christ,' and will deceive many. You will hear of wars and rumors of wars, but see to it that you are not alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of birth pains. Then you will be handed over to be persecuted and put to death, and you will be hated by all nations because of me. At that time, many will turn away from the faith and will betray and hate each other. And many false prophets will appear and deceive many people. Because of the increase of wickedness, the love of most will grow cold. But he who stands firm to the end will be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come."
World War III is beginning to trend on social media.
Just hours ago, Iran firing missiles at bases in Iraq hosting U.S. troops. As of now, there are no reports of American casualties, but the strike has the world on edge. Iran's attack comes after days of public mourning. A sea of Iranians filling the streets of Tehran, grieving General Qasem Soleimani, killed by U.S. drone strike last week. His funeral, one of the biggest in decades, so packed it proved deadly. As captured on cell phone video, a human stampede left 56 dead and more than 200 injured.
Trump made a big mistake. He killed our hero.
Soleimani's death and the way it was carried out, a game changer for Iran and the U.S. Iran hails Soleimani a hero. The Trump administration calls him a terrorist, blaming him for the killings of hundreds of U.S. troops.
Soleimani made the death of innocent people his sick passion, contributing to terrorist plots as far away as New Delhi and London.
Soleimani, a critic of the U.S., taunted President Trump in a speech in 2018, saying in part, "Let me tell you, Mr. Trump the gambler, know that we are near you in places that don't come to your mind."
Soleimani was plotting imminent and sinister attacks on American diplomats and military personnel, but we caught him in the act and terminated him.
Hostilities continued to escalate after a series of Iranian provocations this past summer, including the downing of an American drone. Then, in late December, an American contractor was killed in a rocket attack in Iraq. The U.S. blamed an Iranian-backed militia and responded with airstrikes that killed at least 24 people. On New Year's Eve, a huge crowd of protesters stormed the U.S. Embassy compound in Baghdad, breaching the highly fortified perimeter. 2 days later, General Soleimani was killed in that U.S. drone attack. But tonight, after Iran's retaliation against U.S. military in Iraq, what happens next is unknown.
While the fight against the coronavirus worldwide continues, another fight also continues to brew in the Middle East between the United States and Iran, with Iraq remaining the most likely battlefield. Last week, 5 rockets were fired at an American oil company working near Basra. U.S. workers had already left the area. It's unclear who was behind the attack. But on April 1st, President Trump warned that his administration received intelligence that Iran, or one of its proxies, was planning a strike on U.S. forces in Iraq, tweeting that if U.S. troops are attacked, quote, Iran will pay a very heavy price indeed.
Now, the world's two most populous nations, both nuclear powers, in a deadly face-off on a disputed border high in the Himalayas.
20 Indian soldiers have been killed fighting with Chinese troops on a disputed border region, according to the Indian Army and government sources. It's the first casualties in 53 years to result from a clash between the nuclear-armed neighbors.
This morning, a dramatic flaring of tensions between North and South Korea. The North blowing up a symbol of peace between the two sides, the Inter-Korean Liaison Office. Opened to fanfare in 2018, a sign that tensions were easing between the countries, now reportedly rubble. It was located near the demilitarized zone, where US forces help police the border, the move coming after weeks of threats from the North. Korean leader Kim Jong-un's sister, Kim Yo-jong, even saying she's instructed the army to prepare to enter part of the demilitarized areas. North Korean media on Saturday warning the South of a regretful, painful time.
A watershed moment that will cause the most serious violation of international law. That's how UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has described Israel's plans to annex parts of the occupied West Bank. Members of the UN Security Council and the Arab League have been meeting to discuss Israel's move, which could be put into motion as soon as next week. Most of them were united in their opposition, with warnings that Israel's unilateral action could trigger a major escalation in the region.
It's the end of the world, my friends.
Today, the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist moves the hands of the doomsday clock. It is 100 seconds to midnight.
Since 1947, the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist has managed the doomsday clock, a symbol for how close dangerous technologies of our own making have pushed society to a point of no return. In the 40s, this point was a nuclear war. But since 2007, the doomsday clock has also measured the risks of catastrophic climate change. Now, the doomsday clock sits at 100 seconds to midnight, the closest it's ever been.
Haunting images, flames, plumes of smoke, and firefighters desperately battling walls of fire. Weather conditions deteriorated once again going into the weekend along the southeastern coast of Australia. 250,000 people were asked to evacuate, but instead, many prepared to protect their homes with hoses. But in the thick brush of Australia's mountain ranges, 2 fires merged into a 1.5 million acre blaze. Firefighters say the flames are taking hold because of record drought. Inspector Phil Sheedy has been a firefighter for 3 decades.
In 33 years, you've never seen conditions like this?
Not like this, no. No. It's the duration and severity and just, the magnitude of them is just incredible. I've seen trees that would, ostensibly healthy-looking tree with a bit of fire at its base, and they just come down really quick because the soil is so dry.
Hundreds of Australians are starting to sift through the rubble of their still smoldering homes.
There's also an all-out effort to save Australia's animals. It's estimated nearly 1 billion animals, species found nowhere else in the world, have died.
At least 33 people have died as tornadoes carved a path of destruction from Texas to the Carolinas. This outbreak comes as the entire country deals with the coronavirus outbreak.
Floating structures crashed into a bridge in Serbia, destroying them in seconds. The houses and other vessels were set afloat after heavy flooding struck the Eastern European country. It's just one of several recent instances where Mother Nature seems to be making a point. On the French island of Corsica, flash floods swamped the streets. Emergency services had to rescue several drivers stranding by the raging waters. In early June, a cyclone struck the west coast of India. The powerful storm ripped the roofs off buildings and uprooted trees. A recent intense lightning storm off the coast of Athens, Greece, was captured in time-lapse photographs. Weather near Athens has also caused heavy hail and flooding. In the UK, torrential rains caused flooding in the English city of Birmingham. Heavy rains also caused flooding in central China. cars were nearly submerged as this boy tried in vain to keep out the water with a broom. But some parts of the U.S. have the opposite problem. With the dry summer season in effect, arid Arizona saw several wildfires. Crews on the land and in the air battled to contain the brush fire near Phoenix. Planes dumped hundreds of gallons of flame retardant on a fire in Arizona's Tonto National Forest. In Indonesia, the Mount Merapi volcano erupted twice, sending masses of smoke and ash high into the sky. A volcano in Ecuador's Amazon region spewed ash over nearby forests and towns. Dust from the Sangay volcano also threatens larger towns in the region.
6.4 earthquake and multiple aftershocks rocking the island just a day after a 5.8 earthquake destroyed multiple homes in this famous landmark, the Punta Ventana rock formation.
6.5 quake hit near Tonopah, Nevada this morning. It's about 3 hours north of Las Vegas. The quake, initially reported as a 6.4, was followed by dozens of aftershocks, including a 4.9.
Good morning, George. Clayton Sandell here in Denver following breaking news out of Utah. A magnitude 5.7 earthquake hitting just after 7 a.m. local time, about 10 miles west of Salt Lake City.
A 5.8 quake just hit about 20 minutes ago. It was centered 12 miles outside of the town of Lone Pine, which is north of Ridgecrest on the way to Bishop. There were reports of some light shaking as far south as Orange County. Ridgecrest was rocked by a 7.1 quake last July after several slightly smaller earthquakes.
Now, at least 4 people are now known to have died during Sunday's powerful earthquake in the southern Philippines. Well, rescuers are continuing to search for survivors after the 6.9 tremor hit the island of Mindanao. The region is still recovering from a series of quakes in October.
By one of the most powerful earthquakes on record in that region, magnitude 7.7. It was centered in the sea between Jamaica and Cuba, and it was felt 450 miles away in Miami.
The earthquake's epicenter more than 400 miles away off the coast of Jamaica and Cuba. School children hiding under desks in Jamaica, 77 miles from the epicenter. Others evacuated in Kingston.
Big earthquake going on. Look at this.
In nearby Cayman Islands, the pool water seen rattling. The last month has been an extremely active period for earthquakes in the Caribbean. Today's quake comes just 2 weeks after a series of devastating earthquakes in Puerto Rico, which sits along the same tectonic plates.
The U.S. Geological Survey says a 7.2 magnitude earthquake hit southwestern Mexico. The epicenter was a little more than a mile from Pinotepa in the state of Oaxaca. The quake set off an alert system in the country's capital, where people fled buildings. Last September, a 7.1 magnitude quake in the region left 369 people dead.
Antarctica has just had its hottest day ever recorded. The temperature rose to 18.3 degrees Celsius. That was at an Argentine research base. It's on the Antarctic Peninsula, jutting up towards South America, and that part of the continent has warmed much faster than the global average over the past 50 years, causing glaciers to shrink by 87%.
It was here last Saturday. Residents say they recorded the hottest temperature ever for the Arctic.
The World Meteorological Organization is seeking to verify reports of a new temperature record north of the Arctic Circle. This is a reported 38 degrees Celsius.
Climate nonprofit Berkeley Earth calculated that temperatures across Russia have averaged 8 degrees higher than normal this year. That's the largest anomaly ever seen in a country's average.
Nicknamed Godzilla for its size, the monster weather event hasn't happened in half a century. This photograph from space shows it leaving the Sahara Desert a week ago, traveling 5,000 miles, coating the Atlantic, Caribbean, and Gulf of Mexico with a layer of dry, dusty air.
Seen from space, traveling thousands of miles from North Africa and through the Caribbean. Here's Puerto Rico before and after, now sweeping parts of the southeast.
Ukatay! Ukatay! Ukatay!
In East Africa, the air carries two plagues. Locusts, swarms with as many as 50 billion insects. As COVID-19 threatens the people, locusts threaten people's livestock and food.
They are being a menace, eating our grass and even getting into our homes. When we slaughter our livestock, we find locust faces in their stomachs. Without a doubt, they are affecting our health, our animals' health, and the environment.
In February, 8 East African countries experienced an initial swarm, the largest for parts of the region in 70 years. And now a new wave is 20 times larger than the first wave.
There are swarms that it's not uncommon to be, let's say, the size of Manhattan in New York City. So they can be very big. In one day, that swarm can eat the same amount of food as everybody in New York and California combined.
Locust swarms are not new in East Africa, the Middle East and South Asia, but climate scientists say erratic weather linked to climate change has created ideal conditions for the insects to surge in numbers not seen in a quarter of a century.
Crawling across thousands of kilometres and flying through the air, billions of locusts have swarmed large swathes of agricultural land in Pakistan and India, devouring any vegetation in their path.
I've lost fruits worth thousands of dollars. I've spent all my life growing these trees, but now these swarms have destroyed them.
The UN says Pakistan will lose more than $4 billion worth of winter and summer crops. Pakistan's government is using planes to spray pesticide.
We have now 9 aircrafts. We are looking for 6 more, and I'm sure that we'll be able to take care the locusts which would be coming from Iran as well as from Muscat, and in third phase coming from Africa.
While locust plagues aren't new, scientists say climate change is making them worse. They say this infestation is driven by unusually warm weather and heavy rains in the Arabian Peninsula last year, creating the ideal breeding grounds.
Invasive species that has scientists on high alert, the so-called murder hornets, arriving in the United States for the first time, and experts are warning they could decimate bee populations across the U.S.
Now, as the pandemic keeps people indoors, another potential reason not to go outside in 2020, the so-called murder hornet.
Say with this murder hornet in the heels of the coronavirus pandemic that we're just ready for this Jumanji game to be over with.
Yeah, remember when we were excited about 2020?
Wow.
New Year's Eve? Not so much anymore.
We've come for the children's cartoon Paw Patrol, Gone with the Wind, Legos, the Cracker Barrel restaurant chain, and even a ride at Disney World called Splash Mountain. All in the name of trying to erase the culturally insensitive. It seems nothing is safe from the cancel culture movement. Hollywood stars have gone public to confess their supposed sins of ignoring racial injustice.
I take responsibility.
I take responsibility.
They could also be trying to save their careers. A number of celebrities and corporate heads have already lost their jobs for alleged racism or cultural insensitivity. Even the editorial page editor of the liberal New York Times. Another casualty is the Church of the Highlands in Birmingham, Alabama, with 60,000 attendees. They will no longer be able to meet at local high schools after the pastor liked social media posts supporting President Trump and was declared culturally insensitive.
The worst crimes are committed by people saving the world.
David Horowitz, who led the 60s anti-war movement, says the difference between the Vietnam War protests and the George Floyd protests is that Black Lives Matter has real power to change America, thanks to the backing of the Democratic Party, corporate America, and the media.
Yeah, I find this shocking that so many people cave into this. All the stupid apologies by people, and then Hollywood funding the looters. Who do you think is most hurt by these riots? Poor black people. Who's going to be hurt the most by defunding the police and tying their hands? Poor black people.
Even some on the left are now alarmed by the censorship and firings. University of Pennsylvania professor Jonathan Zimmerman, a staunch opponent of President Trump, wrote in the Chicago Tribune that what he calls rituals of public humiliation are not accomplishing anything.
The irony of our moment is you find a lot of people saying, we need an honest conversation about race. but then essentially erecting barriers about what can be said on it. And that's not a formula for an honest conversation.
When I asked Professor Zimmerman if America was headed into dangerous territory, he replied,
"No, we're not headed towards it. We're in it. Like this is not a journey. We've arrived, man."
Britain has left the European Union 3 years and 7 months after Britons voted in a referendum to leave. The moment has officially happened. At 11 p.m. London time on Friday night, the UK exited the bloc. It's the first country to ever do so.
The historic week in the impeachment of President Trump. The trial is set to essentially begin on Tuesday, and tonight the president heading back to Washington after his lawyers released their first legal argument, calling the case against him, quote, illegitimate and dangerous.
This 6-page letter blasting the House impeachment effort as poisonous partisanship, a lawless process, arguing nothing in these articles could permit even beginning to consider removing a duly elected president.
On June 4th, around 8 p.m., lightning struck the Washington Monument in Washington, D.C., providing an ominous sign from the storm above during these turbulent times in the United States. Is this a sign from God? An end times false sign from Satan, as described in the book of Revelation? Some say this lightning strike is a warning message to President Trump, while others argue that it's a sign for unruly rioters and looters to heed, a cautionary symbol to deter the civil war our country seems to be headed towards before its unfortunate arrival.
I believe, as do the other folks that were on the flight, that when we visually saw it, that it was something not from this world.
This feels like a really big story to me. It's not exactly clear why Vladimir Putin's more interesting than this. I think this seems like a big deal.
Tonight, CNN has learned the Pentagon had a secretive program to research UFOs like the one Fravor spotted. The project was called the Advanced Aviation Threat Identification Program, run by an official named Luis Elizondo.
I think this is a national security imperative. We have clear things that we do not understand how they work, operating in areas that we can't control.
It's called the Vault, the FBI's digital reading room, where any of us can go online and view the Bureau's most notorious cases. Guess which is the most popular file? John Dillinger's? Jimmy Hoffa's? Nope.
Since we opened the vault, it's been this memo about flying discs or flying saucers, and it relates to an allegation that we heard from a third hand, saying that the Air Force had found a couple of saucers out in the New Mexico desert.
No, can't be. I mean, most people want to read about Machine Gun Kelly and Al Capone, right?
You would think so, but this memo itself has gotten over 1 million page views in 2 years since we put it up. Al Capone doesn't make our top 50.
The memo's all of 2 paragraphs. Agent Guy Hoddle, then head of the FBI's Washington field office, writes that an Air Force investigator stated that 3 so-called flying saucers had been recovered in New Mexico. They were described as being circular in shape with raised centers, approximately 50 feet in diameter. Not only that, each one was occupied by 3 bodies of human shape, but only 3 feet tall, dressed in metallic cloth of a very fine texture. Each body was bandaged in a manner similar to the blackout suits used by speed flyers and test pilots.
The Air Force has recently made public Project Blue Book, an archive of UFO reports and investigations dating back to the 1940s. The report includes more than 12,000 sightings made by military members and civilians.
The U.S. Navy has confirmed the existence of unidentified flying objects. This, yes, I agree, one clapper, this is massive news that could shatter our entire conception of the universe and our place in it.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you will, look right here.
Just when you thought 2020 couldn't get any more bizarre.
My gosh.
The Pentagon declassifying 3 videos of what they're calling unexplained aerial phenomena. Harry Reid, former senator of Nevada, home to the infamous Area 51, tweeting, "I'm glad the Pentagon is finally releasing this footage, but it only scratches the surface of research and materials available."
Men would faint for fear of what's coming on the earth. What does that mean, do you think?
Well, it can be a bunch of things. It could be an asteroid coming, like that allegedly wiped out the dinosaurs. It could be the mysterious and ever-present but never showing up Planet X. It can be all those things. In my opinion, this ties back into the so-called extraterrestrial presence. I mean, what's manifesting over the planet, which the numbers are through the roof, is the presence of the UFO phenomenon. I mean, it's everywhere. And it's not only the classic discs, cigars, and now it's mainstream. When Tucker Carlson brings people on every 4 to 6 weeks talking about it,
He does.
That's mainstream. So something is happening here, and this is, and I've been saying this literally for over 20 years. If a mile wide or a half mile wide craft or maybe 4 or 5 smaller craft appear in the sky and just sit there, that's the game changer.
Yeah.
And people need to understand that's the game changer. That changes everything on the planet and does so instantaneously. It is a global paradigm shift. Everyone on the planet sees it because we're all wired up and hooked up with the internet and TV and satellites. Everyone sees it. And when they come, and I've written about this extensively, they will say these things. E.T. will tell us. And let me back up here. The Darwinian theory, which has cut the knees off of Christianity and literally supplanted the Christian worldview. And if you homeschool your kid, the moment they go to college, what do they learn? Darwinism. It's everywhere. It's the global paradigm. It's the paradigm which the entire planet runs on. The planet runs on the Darwinian paradigm. However, the neo-Darwinists realize that Darwinism isn't quite working out here because they realize the complexity of a deoxyribonucleic acid, a double helix of life, the DNA molecular structure, just couldn't have happened by chance. And everything stays in its own kind, just like the Bible says, but they won't go there. So the neo-Darwinists are looking out there to the stars. They're looking out there saying, well, maybe life was seeded here. And that concept is called panspermia. So they think that we were seeded here. So when E.T. comes back or shows themselves, and by the way, it's not E.T., it's the fallen angelic host.
Yes.
It's utterly demonic. It's the coming great deception.
Yeah.
They will state that we created all life on this planet. We genetically manipulated early man. We started the world's first civilizations, first religions, and now at this critical juncture, we're back to usher mankind into a golden age. And what's amazing is this is what the New Agers are talking about. When E.T. shows up, it's a golden age.
It was revealed that now there are more witnesses within the Navy who are now coming out and saying, look, you know all of that footage of those craft? They've been confiscated and destroyed. 2 men showed up on an aircraft carrier on a helicopter, got off, went in, got the information, took it off, and it's gone. I'm telling you, this is going deep and it's dark, and the governments are involved, the New World Order's involved, the deep state is involved, the demonic is involved, the thrones of Satan's power, and the Word of God says that this thing that happens in the last days is going to be in accordance with the work of Satan.
This is your biohazard warning system. Due to the new COVID-19 virus, the following measures come into effect. We are announcing the start of the immediately effective nationwide quarantine, which has been officially approved by the United States government. Commencing at the siren, leaving your own household, even for medical or everyday errands, will be a criminal offense and will be punished with state-forced quarantine and, depending on the severity of the quarantine violation, death. Visits to relatives, neighbors, or friends will be illegal during this time. No one has been granted immunity from the quarantine. No citizen or group will be exempt. All emergency services will be suspended until further notice and cannot be reached. Every household will receive a monthly data volume of 400 megabytes in order to keep the network load under control. There is currently no time limit for these measures. We hope for yourself and your family to be prepared for the worst. Blessed be our new founding fathers and America, a nation reborn. May God be with you all.
World Health Organization has just declared a global coronavirus. It is a pandemic at this point.
From above, iconic landmarks before and after coronavirus hit provide a dramatic slideshow. Watch the crowds vanish from the Vatican St. Peter's Square to Tiananmen Square and Miami Beach.
It was like the world without humanity. In many cases, it was.
But NGA Deputy Director Stacy Dixon doesn't just look for what's missing. She's searching for what's been added. In Germany, the Oktoberfest venue became a COVID testing site. And last month, a satellite spotted these Chinese military planes on a base that used to be a reef in the South China Sea. The Department of Homeland Security later concluded the Chinese government intentionally concealed the severity of COVID-19 in early January while it stockpiled medical supplies.
From an intelligence perspective, this image tells you that the Chinese government understood that they had a real crisis on their hands.
I believe that's right.
As COVID-19 spread to the Middle East, Iran's government seemed to minimize the pandemic. But from the sky, massive new graves were detected in the city of Qom.
How did you take social media and then marry it up with the satellite images?
We had videos that were beginning to surface that showed people that were walking to a cemetery that were showing large trenches that had been prepared in case of the growing pandemic.
These white piles of debris provided another clue.
That was most likely lime to help prevent against the spread of infection. A photo doesn't lie. It's just the facts.
With global protests unfolding, as the U.S. and other nations reopen, there are new COVID hotspots. Now satellite imagery could help show the way forward.
We will not be able to return to normalcy until we find a vaccine or effective medications. Conferences, concerts, sporting events, religious services, dinner in a restaurant, none of that will resume until we find a vaccine.
What does opening up look like? Which activities have, like schools, have such benefit and can be done in a way that the risk of transmission is very low?
Yeah.
And which activities, like mass gatherings, may be, in a certain sense, more optional. And so until you're widely vaccinated, those may not come back at all.
As of this morning, more than 2 million Americans have tested positive for the coronavirus. More than 112,000 of them have died. The head of Harvard's Global Health Institute said yesterday the U.S. death toll could reach 200,000 in September. The day-to-day number of cases is rising in more than a dozen states compared with 2 weeks ago. Manuel Bojorquez is in Miami Beach, which marked a new phase in reopenings yesterday.
Do you happen to have a face mask or something with you? Yeah.
After nearly 3 months, Miami's beaches are open again, even as cases in Florida continue to rise.
I got sanitizer.
Is it the right time to reopen the beaches?
We've been thinking about that a lot, and I tend to be more cautious than most.
Dan Gelber is the mayor of Miami Beach. He says if crowds grow too large and cases spike, the beaches could close again.
We want people to, realize that this pandemic is still here. But we've got to open up our economy. We've got to give people the opportunity to get out there.
But as state reopenings and large protests continue across the country, there are concerns about a second wave of outbreaks. Earlier this week, 16 states reported an increase in average new COVID-19 cases compared to 2 weeks ago. At least 14 states have seen a rise in current hospitalizations since Memorial Day, including Texas, where hospitalizations jumped 42%. In Arizona, hospital capacity is at 83%. State data shows the usage of ventilators, ICU beds, and intubations at all-time highs.
I'm a wartime president. This is a war.
There's a war, different kind of a war that we've ever had.
אנחנו נאבקים עכשיו במלחמה שהיא מחייבת אותנו לנקוט באמצעים מיוחדים.
War analogies are getting a workout these days as politicians of different stripes try to rally public support.
We must act like any wartime government.
국가 전체가 감염병과의 전쟁에 돌입했습니다.
And when governments lay down new security measures, the kind that electorates would reject in normal, more peaceful times, history suggests that they will be reluctant to give up those new powers.
Protests erupting from Minnesota to Oklahoma to Michigan in defiance of social distancing guidelines.
The sad irony here is that the protest was that they don't like being in this stay-home order, and they may have just created a need to lengthen it.
Meanwhile, there are now over 7.4 million confirmed cases of COVID-19 around the world. That's according to Johns Hopkins University, who say the number of deaths has passed 417,000.
As many as 140,000 people could die by the 4th of July. This is an anxious moment as states reopen and people begin to gather in larger and larger numbers again. The toll is already staggering, more than 2 million cases and more than 114,000 lives lost. FEMA's latest map shows where the numbers of cases are highest, especially across the South. North Carolina reporting a single-day high in cases and deaths. Florida with a record number of cases 2 days straight, especially in nursing homes and at farming sites. The hospitalization rate in Texas is up 42% since Memorial Day. Some areas are now putting on the brakes. The city of Nashville is delaying the next phase of reopening to deal with a flare-up, while the governor of Oregon has put a one-week pause on further reopenings as the number of infections there hits a new high.
We are closing out a week that has seen more new COVID cases in America than in any week since the pandemic began.
And new cases hitting a record for the second straight day. More than, listen to this, 39,000 new infections. And take a look at this map. All 15 of those states have now hit daily records within just the past week.
Doctors are sounding the alarm this morning as California, Florida, and Texas, America's 3 most populated states, hit new record highs in daily COVID cases and hospitalizations.
The U.S. is headed in the wrong direction on COVID-19. That's the warning from Dr. Anthony Fauci, the nation's top infectious disease expert. Fauci's warning comes as the nation sees some 40,000 new cases a day, numbers he told senators could more than double.
I would not be surprised if we go up to 100,000 a day if this does not turn around, and so I am very concerned. I think it's important to tell you and the American public that I'm very concerned because it could get very bad.
If you're not going to stay home and you're not going to wear masks in public, we have to enforce, and we will.
At least 35 states now reporting an increase in cases. Across the country, 45,000 new cases in the last 24 hours. Hospitalizations going up too, Robin, the biggest jump since April.
And as 17 states either pause or roll back their reopenings, they're finding resistance.
Is warning the coronavirus crisis has put the world on the brink of a hunger pandemic. 265 million people could face acute food shortages by the end of the year. That is double last year's projections. CBS's Deborah Patta has more.
This is what hunger looks like when it spills over into the streets. A food stampede in Kenya's largest slum, leaving scores injured and 2 dead. White flags waved by defeated families in Peru, signaling to authorities they've run out of supplies. A mile-long line for food in India, where workers wait in the hot sun. Protests in Lebanon as food prices surge uncontrollably. Even in the richest countries, the virus has left people hungry, but for the world's poor, it means starvation. Like South Africa, where a national lockdown has led to a sudden loss of work and hunger for millions. Food distribution is weighed down by cumbersome bureaucracy. If you're not on the day's list, there is no food.
Looking at another day of extreme volatility, stocks opened just moments ago with the Dow down more than 600 points. And this week alone, stocks have now wiped out nearly $3.5 trillion in value. This morning, stocks in the midst of their worst week since the financial crisis.
Stocks cratered Thursday in a stunning sell-off.
The Dow Jones Industrial Average suffered its biggest one-day blow since the market crash of 1987, digging deeper into its first bear market in a decade.
Outbreak of Ebola has been confirmed in the Democratic Republic of Congo. It's another health crisis for a country already devastated by COVID-19 and the world's largest measles outbreak.
The new strain called G4EA-H1N1 descended from the swine flu that emerged in 2009, which caused the first global flu pandemic in 40 years. According to scientists, the new strain has been identified as having all the essential hallmarks of a candidate pandemic virus. Scientists say that while the world is distracted by the COVID-19 pandemic, it should not lose sight of this new and potentially dangerous virus, despite it not being deemed an immediate problem.
2004, the FDA approved a chip that is implanted into a person's hand. In 2019, Elon Musk and Neuralink have announced that they are planning on implanting computer chips into people's heads so that we can merge with artificial intelligence. MIT, under funding of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, has developed a quantum dot ink implant that can be monitored by a smartphone. And in 2020, World Patent Number 060606 was published by Microsoft Technology, titled Cryptocurrency System Using Body Activity Data. It outlines a technology wherein human body activity associated with a task provided to a user may be used in a mining process of a cryptocurrency system. The human is given an activity to accomplish, which is sent from a body sensor to the cloud and to the cryptocurrency system, rewarding the human with money. And while this is happening, the world is being told to stay at home until a vaccine can be developed, while the 5G needed to run artificial intelligence is rapidly rolling out worldwide.
Out of these troubled times, our fifth objective, a new world order can emerge, a new era.
This is not a test. This is your emergency broadcast system announcing the commencement of the annual purge sanctioned by the U.S. government. Weapons of Class 4 and lower have been authorized for use during the purge. All other weapons are restricted. Government officials of ranking 10 have been granted immunity from the purge and shall not be harmed. Commencing at the siren, any and all crime, including murder, will be legal for 12 continuous hours. Police, fire, and emergency medical services will be unavailable until tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. when the purge concludes. Blessed be our new founding fathers and America, a nation reborn. May God be with you all.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be. Now we can see a new world coming into view. A world in which there is the very real prospect of a new world order.
Hours, they drew a crowd this large, mimicking scenes in Minneapolis, Denver.
Michigan, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cop cars completely on fire from front to back.
Yeah, I hope they reach white folks. I hope they reach their neighborhood, because that's where this needs to be at.
About why he's out here. Take a listen to what he had to say. All right, man, we saw you at the New Balance store. Why are you out here?
Man, period, point blank, just like all my real ones trying to get some money.
To anyone who acted criminally in this weekend's racist violence, you will be held fully accountable. Justice will be delivered.
New York City police officer brazenly struck by a car last night in the Bronx. Spread to one of the patrol vehicles. Videotaping. Something on fire. There's a firecracker.
Reports this was the Apple store being broken into.
Denver, a driver nearly running over a protester.
I have nowhere to go now. I have no way to get there because the buses aren't running.
Huge moment happening in history right now.
The death of George Floyd has sparked international outrage with protests happening around the country and right here in Ohio.
Police clashing with demonstrators in downtown Cleveland.
These are all people of the community. We should not be subject by the same people that we pay salaries to mistreat us in our community just because we want to come protest.
We are here to protect the rights of the public, which means that violence and destruction of property will not be tolerated.
The march started toward the Justice Center. And that's when protesters began throwing water bottles and other objects, and we heard loud noises.
Spraying stuff and throwing stuff at us.
Spraying pepper spray, shooting tear gas on the floor at the people who were kneeling.
There was rubber bullets that they were shooting.
City after city this weekend, crowds turning riotous, chaos outside the White House where protesters converged for a third night. Some shooting off fireworks and setting cars and buildings on fire, including the historic St. John's Church. In Philadelphia, smashed up storefronts, protesters throwing rocks and Molotov cocktails at police. Police arresting at least 4,100 people across 22 cities in just 3 days. In New York, 345 protesters were arrested Saturday night, including Chiara de Blasio, daughter of New York City's mayor, Bill de Blasio. National Guard troops now activated in 21 states and Washington, D.C. to control crowds and looting.
So let's get right to Pierre Thomas tonight. And Pierre, your sources now indicating that authorities are somewhat concerned that extremists may try to launch attacks while America is trying to fight this coronavirus?
That's right, David. In recent weeks, federal authorities have been warning local police that potential mass killers, from white supremacists to Islamic radicals, may see the coronavirus crisis as optimal timing for an attack.
This morning, the naval station in Corpus Christi, Texas, under attack.
Attention all units, they have an active shooter on base.
At approximately 6:15 a.m. local time, an armed suspect speeds through a gate on the base. Authorities looking at this video with what sounds like gunfire. He gets out of his car, reportedly pulling out a handgun and firing, hitting one sailor in the chest who barely escapes serious injury because she's wearing a bulletproof vest. Other security guards respond. With gunfire of their own, he's wounded and later dies. The FBI has not yet identified the shooter.
Somewhere in the sea of peaceful protesters, authorities say professional agitators are wreaking havoc. Across the nation, thousands of Americans are taking to the streets to voice their anguish over the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis. But police say small bands of so-called professional agitators are hijacking peaceful demonstrations like those behind me. Cops say 27-year-old Samantha Shader threw a Molotov cocktail at an NYPD vehicle. Prosecutors say she has been arrested 11 times in 11 different states. This photo allegedly captured a woman identified as a human rights lawyer holding a Bud Light bottle filled with gasoline and tissue paper stuffed in as a fuse. Police have reportedly dubbed her a professional agitator. Piles of bricks have appeared at the scenes of major demonstrations. There is speculation they may have been planted there by Antifa for use as projectiles aimed at cops and storefront windows.
Tuesday's protests were more peaceful than in previous days. George Floyd's family led a crowd of 60,000 in Houston, delivering a heartfelt message of heartache and peace.
We want to shed tears today, but we're not going to drop a drop of blood in Houston, Texas today.
The Houston police chief marched among them in solidarity, hugging demonstrators.
It's visceral, the pain and the anger.
Still, in many cities, the peaceful demonstrations by day are replaced by violence overnight. Near Boston, groups threw fireworks and water bottles at officers. And in New York, thousands of protesters defied an 8 p.m. curfew, resulting in hundreds of arrests. Police are investigating this video, showing a car slamming into an officer in a hit-and-run in the Bronx. The officer is in serious condition. Among those killed in the violence is a retired St. Louis police captain. 77-year-old David Dorn was shot and killed early Tuesday by people who broke into a pawn shop. Police tactics are also under scrutiny. In Atlanta, 2 officers were fired and others faced discipline after smashing in the windows of this car and tasing the college students inside before violently dragging them out.
The belief shot. I mean, you have these piles of bricks and rocks showing up, as you said, near the various protest sites in cities like New York, Kansas City, Dallas, Fayetteville, North Carolina, and none of the sites are near construction areas, leaving many to assume the bricks were planted by outside agitators specifically to stir up trouble. In fact, the New York Police Department says it has evidence that anarchist groups were pushing the protests toward violence and vandalism. Federal law enforcement officials say the violence points to far-left groups like Antifa. Others say far-right groups might also be involved. And many of the looters don't need to be supplied with bricks and rocks because they show up with their own tools in hand, well prepared to destroy property. Police in Minneapolis also found caches of stolen vehicles and incendiary devices in areas where numerous fires have broken out. And in Baltimore, there's evidence of double danger. Police have been sweeping the downtown area after, get this, finding both bricks and bottles with potential accelerants already inside them.
The following measures are going into effect immediately. First, we are ending the riots and lawlessness that has spread throughout our country. We will end it now. Today, I have strongly recommended to every governor to deploy the National Guard in sufficient numbers that we dominate the streets. Mayors and governors must establish an overwhelming law enforcement presence until the violence has been quelled. If a city or state refuses to take the actions that are necessary to defend the life and property of their residents, then I will deploy the United States military and quickly solve the problem for them.
Tonight, a nation on edge. For the first time in 164 years, the governor of Minnesota is now fully mobilizing the National Guard. Protests erupting in Minneapolis last night, the powder keg of the crisis. Businesses set on fire as rage continues to boil over for the death of George Floyd while in police custody.
George Floyd! The situation in Minneapolis is no longer in any way about the murder of George Floyd. It is about attacking civil society, instilling fear, and disrupting our great cities.
The anger now spreading across the country. A protest in Philadelphia that started peacefully this afternoon grew violent, a police car burning. In Los Angeles this evening, police pushing back massive crowds using batons and firing rubber bullets. In New York, this police car in flames. Authorities clashing with protesters, making 150 arrests, charging one woman with attempted murder for throwing a Molotov cocktail at 4 officers. This video showing what appears to be an officer shoving a woman to the ground. Police are now investigating that incident. In Atlanta, hundreds descending on CNN's Atlanta headquarters, defacing property and setting off fireworks.
The National Guard arrived in Los Angeles this morning after peaceful protests gave way to rioting overnight. The city's iconic shopping districts, from the world-famous Rodeo Drive to the historic Grove Market, looked like war zones as thousands of people shattered windows and looted businesses.
I'm so angry. Like, it's my life. I put everything in here.
I think it's just rebel-rousing and rioting.
Buildings were set on fire along with police cars. As weekend protests ignited across the country, California has become a lightning rod. In neighboring Arizona, the Phoenix police chief put it like this.
To be clear,
The level of criminal behavior we saw last night will not be tolerated.
What's less clear is how officials will ease tensions. This weekend's protests against police brutality are also fueled by months-long isolation and financial ruin.
Tonight, there is an urgent hunt at this hour for a gunman who fired on a police station in Paso Robles, California, shooting a deputy in the face. And then a body found a mile away, someone shot dead. Authorities do believe it's related. That community put on lockdown. And ABC's Will Carr is in California.
Tonight, police are on the hunt for an active shooter wanted for attacking a police station in California.
Shot northeast of the building.
Authorities say this is the shooter with that long, curly hair and dark beard.
We feel that this was an ambush, that he planned it.
Hi, Tucker. This was a conference call on Sunday, May 31st, to talk about Chicago's response to the widespread looting. On the call were Mayor Lori Lightfoot and all 50 Chicago aldermen and alderwomen, including Alderman Raymond Lopez, one of the mayor's harshest critics. Now, for context, on the day of the conference call, Chicago had 699 arrests, mostly looters. 132 officers were injured. There were 48 shootings, 17 homicides, and Alderman Lopez accused the mayor of being underprepared as the looting spread, saying his ward had become a virtual war zone.
If you're an elected official that for any reason is on this call, I'm asking you to ask yourself, what are you willing to sacrifice to make sure that overfunded police departments are defunded?
We need to completely dismantle the Minneapolis Police Department.
This is not hyperbole or drama for effect here. People will die if this is implemented. Kids will be killed, teenagers will be killed.
We're sorry. You have reached a number that has been disconnected or is no longer in service.
The violence erupted early afternoon in Trafalgar Square. Far-right activists had hijacked a protest to protect statues, including that of Winston Churchill. At points early on, they clashed with some of the Black Lives Matter protesters as police tried to keep the peace. The Black Lives Matter group was mostly massing in Hyde Park. Some of the protesters had been just as disruptive last weekend, clashing with police and vandalising Churchill's statue. The job of the police was to keep these two movements apart.
Protesters have no confidence the Lebanese government can stop the worsening economic crisis. That anger and frustration is fueling violent protests as people lose hope. In Beirut, demonstrators threw fireworks and rocks at riot police. They were met with a volley of tear gas. Shops in the capital were attacked. And in the northern city of Tripoli, protesters hurled petrol bombs at soldiers.
Of fierce anti-government protests in Hong Kong. The city endured months of unrest as some 1 million demonstrators filled the streets to stop a controversial extradition bill, rallying to a cry of "Liberate Hong Kong." Ramy Inocencio reports.
1 year ago this week, more than 500,000 Hong Kongers hit the streets. Their anger targeted Chief Executive Carrie Lam and a controversial extradition bill. Their fear, it would give Beijing the power to disappear people in Hong Kong into China's opaque legal system. CBS News was there when police fired the first rubber bullets and tear gas against angry demonstrators.
We've just been tear gassed by the police. You can see those bullets hitting the people that we were in a group with just now.
Protesters shoved an umbrella in my hand, a helmet on my head, and washed the burning chemicals from my eyes. Protesters stormed the legislature on the symbolic date of July 1st, the 22nd anniversary of the day the UK handed its former British colony back to China. Hong Kong's summer of discontent devolved even more. A vicious gang attack on demonstrators in a subway. Police brutalizing protesters. Clashes that shut down Hong Kong's airport, with tension made even worse after police shot a teenager at point-blank range. Demonstrations still raged, with police laying siege to protesters barricaded in a university.
Protesters started marching, chanting "Free Hong Kong," laying out their key demands, only to be met by a line of riot police. But this group of demonstrators say it's their duty to stand up to China. The scope of the national security law is far-reaching. Article 38 says it can essentially target anyone, anywhere. Extradition to China for trial and a maximum sentence of life in prison faces violators of the legislation. People were arrested during Wednesday's rally for breaking the new law. They were in possession of items calling for Hong Kong's independence from China. Police sealed off the area, fired the water cannon, tear gas and pepper balls to break up the crowd. Police say one officer was stabbed in the arm.
For weeks, the streets of Seattle were consumed by chaos. Day after day of protesters facing projectiles and heavily armed police. The police said they were also attacked. The Seattle mayor ordered a temporary ban on tear gas. The police used it anyway. And then they seemed to give up, walking away from this police precinct. The city's police chief said it wasn't her decision.
You fought for days to protect it. I asked you to stand on that line day in and day out, to be pelted with projectiles, to be screamed at, threatened, and in some cases hurt. Then to have a change of course nearly 2 weeks in, it seems like an insult to you and our community.
After they left, the protesters claimed 6 city blocks as their own, calling it the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, or CHAZ.
It's not nothing aggressive or violent or nothing like that. We didn't come out here for any of that. That's what those faces on the walls, Black lives killed by the police. We want people to see that those lives matter.
It reportedly has the feel of a festival. The protesters have planted gardens, given out free food, hosted long conversations about race relations. But the U.S. President Donald Trump sees this very differently, tweeting to the local leaders in part, "Take back your city now. If you don't do it, I will. This is not a game. These ugly anarchists must be stopped immediately. Move fast."
Tonight, tensions are building between police and protesters. In Nashville, demonstrators seizing the steps of the state capitol. On Friday night, claiming control and renaming the area after civil rights icon Ida B. Wells, calling it an autonomous zone.
They are prepared to be arrested if they have to leave. That's a different step.
The group camped out overnight, the governor there threatening action, saying lawlessness, autonomous zones, and violence will not be tolerated. In Asheville, North Carolina, protesters attempted to block the freeway, officers moving in to get rid of those barriers.
Where do we want it? When do we want it? Now!
Those crackdowns come as Seattle remains in an armed standoff. For 6 days, protesters have taken over a 6-block area, driving police from one of their own precincts.
This is the closest I've seen since being a 20-year professional of public safety service of our country to becoming a lawless state.
Police are trying to defuse the situation and negotiating with protesters, saying they will only go in if there's an active shooter. Tonight, 19 days after the killing of George Floyd, major protests show no sign of slowing. Thousands hitting the streets in Philadelphia, Boston, and the nation's capital. Today in New York, Governor Andrew Cuomo giving a 9-month deadline for governments across the state to come up with reforms or see their funding cut.
We're going to birth a new vision for a police force.
There is an uneasy calm in Delhi, kept by hundreds of police and paramilitary. It has come late. At least 35 people have died and over 200 injured in the worst communal riots in decades. Trouble began between the Hindu majority and Muslim minority over the controversial citizens' law brought in by the nationalist government under Prime Minister Modi.
So Jesus says, and all he's talking about in Matthew 24 is the end times when he's going to come back.
Right.
Okay? So he says,
the second coming.
Yeah, for as were the days of Noah, so will be the coming of the Son of Man.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? For as in those days before the flood, they were eating and drinking and marrying and giving into marriage until the day when Noah entered the ark. Meaning, people out there that were all evil, they didn't think anything about it. They thought Noah was an idiot. Just like people think all of you who follow Jesus are idiots now. And it says, Noah entered the ark just as everybody else was carrying on their evil, and they were unaware until the flood came. And then he says, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. So if you want to take the two and put them next to each other, you got Old Testament, Jesus is the ark, and then you got Jesus saying in the New Testament, the way things happened to the world in Noah's day, when you see that kind of society again, just like then, people are going to be carrying on like it's no big deal. And they didn't know it until the ark was shut and the floods came and wiped everybody out. So will be the same thing about the coming of the Son of Man.
The bell's already been rung, and they've heard it. But in the dark, among the stars,
The bell shall be rung! He's hungry. He's found us. And he's coming!